Xenoblade is a franchise that I think I've made clear by now I love dearly. Not just for its different styles of gameplay, but for its casts and the stories it's able to tell. I'd go as far as to say it's probably the most mature and well-written active Nintendo franchise we have right now. Some might call me insane, I prefer a man before his time. But Xenoblade also has, let's just say, an addiction to change. This franchise cannot stay as one thing for 5 seconds. Look at Xenoblade 1. Okay, it's your average JRPG. You got your 3-player setup, your armor, your weapon customization, your blonde boy with a big old sword, etc. Xenoblade 2, you'd think it's the same thing. Nope, we're a gacha now. Fucking field skills. Enjoyed the mature story themes of Xenoblade 1? Well, they're still here, but now you have to deal with anime girls in a goofy-ass tone for the first half of the story. Not to say those things are bad, except for the field skills, but they're obviously very different from what you'd expect going from Xenoblade 1 to Xenoblade 2. And then there's also 3 to talk about, which is even differenter. Each have an entirely new cast set in entirely different worlds and have fairly different gameplay styles, so where do I think you should start? For the sake of this video, I will not discuss Torna, although I love Torna and am of the opinion that Torna clears the ever-living fuck out of original Xenoblade 2, I also think you should play Xenoblade 2 first before you think about touching Torna. Even though it is purchasable without owning Xenoblade 2, it should still be played after 2 to avoid some pretty big spoilers for 2's story. Future Connected is also available to play before you even start Xenoblade 1, but Future Connected is an epilogue, so this one should be obvious. And Future Redeemed, you need to beat Xenoblade 3 to even play it, so again, yeah, this one's obvious. So with that said, the games I'll be discussing today are obviously just the games that are full-on games, not DLC story expansions. The way I'll do this is by splitting it 2 ways, for those who prioritize gameplay over writing, and for those who prioritize the writing over gameplay. Also, to get this out of the way before people ask which version of Xenoblade 1 they should play, it's Definitive Edition. That's it. It's called that for a reason. Play Definitive Edition. If you want to experience the original Wii game or insanely impressive new 3DS port, go do that, but play Definitive Edition first. First though, let's talk just a little about Xenoblade X. Xenoblade X is being given its own little section. You know, it's not like the other kids, so we need to talk about it outside of the class. Xenoblade Chronicles X is a Wii U title released in 2015 as a spin-off to the Xenoblade Chronicles series. The moment you boot the game up, it makes itself very clear that it is not like Xenoblade 1, the only entry released at the time, in the slightest. But it being different isn't why I'm excluding it, no. The reason I'm listing Xenoblade Chronicles X as one I wouldn't recommend is simply because it's on the Wii U. Research shows that only around 2 people in the world own a Wii U. Make that 3. And the Wii U is also not being officially sold anymore. Your best bet is to buy it second-hand, so already availability is very difficult for the required console. On top of that, assuming you can get / already own a Wii U but don't own Xenoblade X, you'd need a laptop / PC and an SD card in order to mod the Wii U and be able to put games, in this case Xenoblade X, on the system, since as of March 27th, 2023, the Wii U eShop no longer exists. You'd also need a good amount of storage, as the game is, if I recall correctly, the second biggest Wii U game. It takes up most of the console's storage. That's a lot of stuff to do in order to simply play this game. It's simply not worth it. And you could argue emulation, but you'd still need a good PC / laptop in order to actually run the game. For some people, this is fine, for others, not so much. It's why I simply cannot recommend X as a good starting point. It doesn't help that the game doesn't have much relation to the rest of the series and wasn't even considered canon until last year with the release of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. With that fork in the road out of the way though, let's get on to the main topic. Before I tell you my recommendation for the many of you who prefer story over gameplay, let's go through all the games and discuss what they're about. As this video is targeted at people who haven't played the games before, I will not be discussing heavy spoilers beyond the first few hours of the game. I'm also going to ask that if you plan on commenting and have already played even at least one of these games, to not include any spoilers as hard as you can either, just because I want this video to be as friendly as possible to newcomers to the series. Xenoblade 1 follows Shulk and his band of silly little misfits on their quest for revenge against the Mechon, in a world that is trapped in a war for survival between the people of Bionis and the people of Mechonis. Along the way of this 50+ hour game, you will experience plenty of twists and turns along with loss, deep themes about the complexities of war and the problems that come with it, and finding the world to seize your own future. Xenoblade 2 is set on another world called Arrest, which follows Rex and Pyra, also known as the Aegis, aka an incredibly powerful weapon, on their race against time to reach the mythical land known as Elysium, in hopes they can save their world, which reaches ever closer to destruction at every second. Xenoblade 2's villains take an interesting approach compared to Xenoblade 1's, where instead of the villains just being people who've been driven to desperation to survive, characters like Malos and Jin are forged by society and its inherent problems. In the end, 2's main story theme surrounds being able to find your place in the world without worrying about the feeling that you don't belong. Then, finally, we have Xenoblade 3, the most recent game in the series as of this video coming out. Xenoblade 3 takes place on Ionios, a world quite literally frozen in time, trapped in an endless battle between Kevesi and Agnes. It is a combination of the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2, and sees our main protagonist Noah, along with his friends, attempt to free the world from Mobius' control. Xenoblade 3's main story theme centers around not being afraid of the future, whether it be forcing yourself to be trapped in an endless cycle to prevent change, or refusing to let go of your past, but instead making use of the time you've been given. Now that I've gone through and given brief summaries of all of the titles, my personal recommendation here would be Xenoblade 1, not just because of the themes present, but because it's easily the most well-paced and well-written, and to be honest with you, I do like Xenoblade 3's story more, but I won't deny that 1's story is simply better. 3's story is really good, but it has an issue with the ending where, while it's not horrible, it's very clearly rushed. Particularly Chapter 7, I won't go into why because spoilers obviously, but still. Xenoblade 2's story has the exact opposite issue. Its second half is spectacular. Some of my favourite moments in the entire series, and honestly all of gaming, are in that second half. But the first 4 chapters are honestly hard to get through, especially Chapter 4, which almost feels like a big filler chapter, with some good moments squished in every now and again. Xenoblade 1 has none of these issues. There was not a single section during the story where I felt like it was going on for too long or not long enough. There were some moments where it's just useless filler objectives, but like I said, they don't go on for too long to where I felt like it was a problem. This doesn't mean Xenoblade 1's story is perfect, its pacing isn't the only thing that matters, but it is one of 2 reasons I chose 1's story over 2 and 3's. The other reason being the cast. Now, let me get this out of the way, this is not my personal favourite cast. That title goes to both Torna's cast and, ironically, 3's cast. Now, that probably has got you asking, wait, if you prefer 3's cast, why did you choose 1's story for the opposite reason? Well, see, 3, like I said previously, is my personal favourite cast, but if we were speaking from a specifically objective standpoint, I think 1's is the best. The biggest reason I can give you is that I think 1's is the cast that is treated with probably the most respect out of any of the others. Looking at the casts from the other games, there's a few issues I have with them. With 2, I personally didn't feel like the cast really felt like a family yet by the end of the game. I felt as if they were just getting started, to be completely real with you. I think what helps 1 compared to 2's cast is that half of 1's cast know each other already. Xenoblade 2 has way more cast members because of the driver blade system, but the drivers themselves don't know each other at all at the start, so a lot of their interactions together are them meeting each other for the first time. There isn't an established past or family bond to feel there yet. In the case of Blaze, there are some exceptions to this, but even then it's not really enough. Xenoblade 1 has 7 party members total, but for the sake of avoiding the massive spoiler which is the 7th party member, I'll only be talking about the first 6 main party members. That obviously being Shulk, Ryan, Dunban, Ricky, Charlotte, and Melia. 3 of these characters all know each other prior to the start of the game, that being Shulk, Ryan, and Dunban. Dunban acts as essentially the big brother to not just Ryan and Shulk, but the entire group. It's very prevalent with Ryan and Shulk though, due to the game from the start, setting up that they've known Dunban and his sister Fiora since they were kids. There's a strong sense of family within the trio, which the first 2 chapters are very heavy on setting up, that helps you to feel more connected with them. Also, another reason for 1's cast over 2's is that in terms of the obligatory knock-on character, I'm picking Ricky over Tora any day of the week. It's really not even close. But what about 3's cast? 3 in general, both in Future Redeemed and the base game, have this big issue with their cast where at least one part of their cast feels too sidelined. With the base game, this goes to Senna, and with Future Redeemed, although I'm not really going to talk about it much, this goes to Nicole and Glimmer. To Senna, it's to a point where even her hero quest wasn't her hero quest. I very much do expect there to be an argument on this somewhere in the comments, because I know there are people who defend Senna's quest, but I don't really care. With 1's cast, I never really felt like that issue was present. It does help with 1, where some of its characters, namely Ricky, who acts as comedy relief, and Dunban, who has already completed his story, are very static in nature because they don't really need proper arcs. So you're really only dealing with the arcs of 4 party members, and then 5 when you get the secret 7th party member, instead of 6 in Xenoblade 3's case. Another thing that does help with 1's cast is that it's given more time than 3's to tell the story at once. This isn't to say its story is bad, but again, it was definitely just a little rushed towards the end. Look at Sharla and Melia, for example. Their arcs take place one at a time as they come in. You meet Sharla, her arc starts and partly ends before you get Melia, comes back later with a vengeance, but by that point Melia's arc is also on pause before it returns after Sharla's arc has been properly wrapped. Xenoblade 3 has all of its cast members at the beginning of the second chapter, and while it does well at doing it one by one, the pacing of the story clearly caused some issues for Senna and also even Lanz. But even then, Lanz does get some other stuff within the story, so it had less of an effect on him. Also, another reason for you to not start with 3's is, like I said at the start of this section, it's a combination of 1 and 2, not just figuratively, but literally. So choosing to start with 3 means you're going to miss out on a lot of cool callbacks, cameos, reused locations, etc. The reason why I'm mentioning this here is because some very important story characters, let's just say, aren't original to Xenoblade 3. So your experience is definitely going to be heightened having played the first 2 games, but keep in mind it's not necessary. How do I know this? Well, 3 is the game I personally started with, and I loved its story while knowing almost nothing about the previous games. And I do still enjoy its story more, primarily because I like the cast a lot more. As much as I just talked shit about how Senna was handled, at the same time, you cannot beat her. Her entire personality and silliness is truly incredible. That said, that about wraps up the yap I have to say on the story section. It's been really hard to write this part without spoiling anything because there is so much to spoil with these games. Not to mention, I could go on for way longer about how good these games are. For Xenoblade 3, I didn't even speak on Console N and Console M, for example. I could go a lot further into these games, but I'll probably save everything I have to say on 1 and 2 for full reviews on those. For now, let's finally speak on the gameplay for those who prefer gameplay over story. The gameplay of the Xenoblade trilogy is the thing that changes the most between games. With story, the only real deviation in terms of tone is Xenoblade 2, but Xenoblade 1 and 3 are very similar in terms of story tone. When it comes to gameplay, it's not even close to how insanely different each game is. Also, once again, while there won't be as many spoilers for gameplay, if there is anything, I won't be talking about it since this video is targeted at beginners. I also ask that if you once again plan on commenting, and you've played at least one of these games already, to also be mindful of spoilers as well. Let's start with Xenoblade 1. Xenoblade 1's gameplay is interesting to say the least. In terms of combat, it's okay. I definitely didn't have as much of a problem with 1's combat compared to other people I've seen who have been pretty negative about it. The art system, instead of being assigned to buttons on the controller, are instead things you have to scroll through, but you can scroll through pretty quickly, so it's not really an issue, but it definitely makes things just a little bit more tedious. Also, an issue with the art system in this game is the countdown. It can take forever to be able to pull off an art again after you use it once, and there's not really a good way to remove this countdown. You can decrease it, but there's no real dramatic changes. In terms of stuff like armor, gems, etc., it's pretty standard stuff. Armor controls your weight, defense, etc., and you can get it from killing monsters or buying stuff at shops located across the world. The armor is also very cool because it provides you with customization for the entire cast, and one big change Definitive Edition made is that if you just want the visual appeal and not the armor's stats, because say for example you have a better armor you can equip, you can do that, which leads to a lot of customization options and mix and matching you can do without sacrificing the combat benefits. Gems are a really fun system and they're easy to make, but I do hate how such a core mechanic of the game, that being the ability to craft gems by yourself, is locked behind an optional side quest which you can pretty much avoid for the entire game. You can still get gems by doing side quests, but it's much easier to make them by yourself. Speaking of which, the side quests in this game are not very good in my opinion. Originally, I really enjoyed them when I was first starting out, but as you go through the game, the quests just pretty much become more of the same and it gets repetitive. Really, really fast. The one exception to this rule is Fallen Arm, as the quests there were actually fun and had more of a story to them, but the rest of the game, not really. It's pretty much the same thing, and it got very boring very quickly. Also, one thing I do want to address is auto attacks. A lot of people put off Xenoblade because they play 5 seconds of it and then think it's an auto attack simulator. And while I do get how you could say that at the start, because the game is obviously meant to be easy at the start, that is not the case for the rest of the game. You will have to utilize your arts effectively in battle if you want any chance of winning, and this goes for all 3 games. Auto attacks alone will not get you close to victory. Another flaw I do have with Xenoblade 1's combat system though is the chain attack system. The chain attack system, in my opinion, is very needlessly confusing and overall frustrating. I played these games backwards, so going from 2 and 3's relatively easy to understand chain attack systems to whatever they cooked up with 1's chain attack system isn't the best experience. It feels heavily luck-based compared to 2 or 3 systems, particularly due to all the factors that go into it, which make it hard to tell if you're going to be able to continue the chain or not. But outside of that, Xenoblade 1's gameplay is pretty fun once you get into it. The open world is visually stunning, and again, that goes for all 3 games. The combat is simple, but still very satisfying to make use of, and while the side content can feel a bit repetitive, it's not always like that. Though I will say by far my biggest issue is, since I played these games backwards, going from 3 to 2 to 1, I felt as if in 1 the builds you could make felt a lot more limited. This isn't to say you can't make some really good builds in 1, but I felt as if 2 and 3 were a lot better in that aspect. Speaking of 2, let's talk about that. Oh boy, where do I even start with Xenoblade 2? Let's just talk about the open world. Allrest is very different to Bionis and Mechonis. But to be honest, I had more fun exploring Allrest. 2 has way more chests in the open world, so there's a stronger incentive to explore. On top of that, you can return to fight unique monsters whenever you like instead of having to wait forever for them to respawn. This also makes grinding a lot more efficient. I was able to get max level in 2 just by defeating the same few unique monsters over and over again, along with some other bits of setup, but I won't go into that. You can find a lot of really good tutorials for grinding in Xenoblade 2 very easily. However, the open world isn't perfect, unfortunately. There are a lot of issues with it that 2 introduces, which makes exploring so much more of a bitch. Let me introduce you to field skills. These fucking suck. I genuinely hate field skills so much. So, one thing Xenoblade 2 did carry over is the affinity chart system. Every single blade has an affinity chart of which you need to raise their trust to unlock each level. The issue is grinding this trust can take forever. Even just playing through the story normally won't be enough, and what does that trust get you? Well, it gives you the ability to unlock higher levels of a blade's field skill, of which you then need to do a small side quest to actually obtain that field skill. You need to do a ton of grinding, some of which is necessary because certain skills are only on rare blades. Example, take one of Mithra's field skills, Light Mastery. That is only obtainable on 3 of the blades. One of them is DLC, so you need to pay for the expansion pass to get it. The second one, you know, it's just the hardest blade in the game to obtain, and when I say hard, I mean hard. Like, this took me a week of setup and legendary core farming just to get, and even with that setup, you only have a 0.7% chance of obtaining her. And the third one is Poppy, but you need to play Tiger Tiger Stage 5 and get the Light Core. Which also introduces another problem with this game, the gacha system. Yes, Xenoblade 2 has a gacha, and to be fair, the gacha is entirely free. There is no paid currency in any Xenoblade game. The only paid thing is the expansion pass, but that's pretty fair considering you get 3 waves of really good content for the base game, and then an entire story DLC. The gacha system is still kind of a nightmare though. It doesn't help that you can only carry about 24 blades, and then it'll be increased twice throughout the story, making the cap 72. You can increase it through Merc quests, which can get you up to 192, but that's a whole other thing I'll get into soon. 72 might seem like a lot, but in a game with quite literally infinite blades, it's really not. You could be sat there for a while trying to get even just the common blade you want, because you might need it for its field skill. Don't even get me started on the rare blades. This wouldn't be a problem if it was just some optional chests, or some secret areas, but you need to use field skills if you want to progress the story, and it kills the pacing dramatically when you're sat there for hours trying to get the proper blade you need for the job, or grinding enough so you can get a blades you already own affinity up, so you don't have to go through the hellish gacha to get blades with the same skill. And Merc quests. I know some people like these, but I'm gonna be real with you, I don't. You need to do these while you're playing through the story. Doing it in a post-game where there's a lot less to do just isn't fun to me. These Merc missions can take from 10 minutes up to 2 full hours, and while you can bring this time limit down dramatically by fulfilling the optional mission requirements, it still takes quite a long time, especially with the 2-hour missions. And before I see people argue, well, why don't you suspend your Switch and leave the game on in sleep mode while you do something else? You can't. The game has to be on and running, otherwise the timer won't run. And these wouldn't be too bad. I've left my Switch running for a while, plenty of times in the past. The issue comes from the fact that there are 5 ranks, and to hit max rank you need 20,000 Merc XP. These missions give almost no XP, or at least none in the grand scheme of things. It just feels like a waste of time to leave my Switch on for hours at a time for something that gains me almost nothing. If you want to make the most out of these quests, you very much need to do them while doing the main story at the same time, otherwise don't even bother in my opinion. I could go on and on about more issues with this game. I haven't even spoken about how boring salvaging is, or how the development levels of each Titan take so stupidly long to pull off. Yet, would it surprise you if this game was still fun? The combat is something I haven't spoken about yet because I wanted to get my issues out of the way. Because despite all of the big problems with this game, the combat is where everything comes together and shines. There's a reason 3 took part of 2's combat for its gameplay systems instead of going back to 1's. The combat is so fun to pull off when you get the hang of it. This game is known for its really bad tutorials, but if you take the time to dive into it and get the hang of it, it's truly an astoundingly well thought out system. I even like the builds you can do in Xenoblade 2 more than Xenoblade 1. 2 also improved certain combat systems which remained from 1, for example, chain attacks. Instead of being luck-based, there's now an elemental system. This system not only encourages you to time your chain attacks so you can get enough orbs, but it also actually makes you have to think in order to match weaknesses. There's also an overkill system in 2 which makes grinding so much easier. I didn't mention this in one section, so I'll say it here. Grinding in Xenoblade 1 sucks ass so much. This is due to a number of reasons, but 2's overkill system allows you to continue piling on damage even after the enemy is beaten, and it gives you a fairly hefty XP bonus for it depending on how much damage you do. 2 also improved arts a lot. The cooldown is now focused on doing auto attacks, which is far faster compared to 1's system of just a regular count based cooldown. In 2, you can basically make the cooldown almost non-existent, which makes combat a lot faster and a lot more fun to play. Another thing I love about Xenoblade 2 is just the vibe it gives off. Xenoblade 2 keeps the 3 party member system 1 had, but because of the blades, there's still technically 6 people on the battlefield, which makes the fights a hell of a lot more lively. The entire art style of Xenoblade 2 on top of that is just really fun. While they definitely take it too far at some points, I don't think the anime-esque tone the game goes for is a bad thing. This game might be plagued with issues, whether it be the game mechanics, terrible lip syncing, and in general voice acting at times, or the pretty poor performance, but weirdly I still love it. I don't know, it's like a guilty pleasure. And finally, we have Xenoblade 3, a perfect mix of 1 and 2's gameplay systems. But first, let me talk a little about the open world because I want to defend it just a bit. While 3's open world is beautiful and genuinely shocking that they got that shit running on a Nintendo Switch, a lot of people criticize it for being a little too open at times with not much to do either. Take 1 and 2, where their areas are open but bustling with people and towns all over the place. 3 on the other hand doesn't really have that, and I'm going to defend this as I think it's good environmental storytelling. If you watch the story section, you'll remember that I said earlier how Ionios, Xenoblade 3's world, is a world literally frozen in time, trapped in an endless battle between Kavesi and Agnes. Because they are trapped in this world where Mobius does not allow them to evolve, it makes sense the world wouldn't have a ton of towns around the place. You do have towns, but those towns are hidden societies. They aren't allowed to be out in the open because otherwise Mobius will find them and wipe them out. Now, I do agree with the sentiment that they could have probably done a little more to make the world more fun to explore, but that's not really a major issue I personally have with the game, though I do understand why people feel that way. Xenoblade 3 also introduces hero quests, and these are genuinely awesome. They're very similar to Blade quests from Xenoblade 2, except you don't need a gambling addiction to experience them all. These quests are actually really well written, and all of the main cast have their own quests, along with almost all of the heroes you can get from the game. The hero system is kind of similar to the Blade system, except you don't equip them to the character, instead they're like another party member but just non-playable. They also do have some stuff that you can't really change, like for example, they can't Ouroboros Link, you can't change their outfits, etc., but that's all fine, it doesn't really matter. The big thing the hero system exists for is the ability to change classes, and this is a huge game changer. Essentially, the cast in Xenoblade 3 aren't just locked to one class. Instead, they can be whatever class they want. At the start, Noah is a sword fighter, Lance is a heavy guard, and Uni is a healer, but then when you unlock class switching, you can play around a bit more. Now Noah has a gun. The class switching mechanic allows for an insane amount of cool builds and combinations, especially since it's not just the class that changes, but you can assign any moves from any class to any build you want. 3's cast is the most customizable cast we've gotten so far in any of the trilogy. On top of that, the combat is faster, as 3 now has 6 fully playable party members instead of just 3, which leads to bigger builds, livelier fights, and more engaging combat. You can also switch characters during combat, which is something you couldn't do in 1 or 2. Now I know a big problem people have with Xenoblade 3's combat is the chain attacks, but I like them. Yes, it's way less complex than 1 or 2's chain attacks, but it's still pretty fun in my opinion. Though, yeah, they should make it an option to turn the music off. I like the music, but it's kind of annoying, especially during the more serious moments of the game. 3 also brings back a ton of other stuff like gems and obviously accessories and all that. Beyond combat and going back to the open world for a second, 3 also keeps the crates and chests scattered all over the world, just like they were in 2, except thankfully field skills don't exist here, so you can open everything no matter what. 3 is, in my opinion, my personal recommendation for where to start if you're more focused on gameplay over the story. It is the perfect balance of 1 and 2's mechanics that will be sure to keep you engaged the entire way through, while also forming its own mechanics on top of that like the fusion attacks or the Ouroboros linking. I could go on way longer about the gameplay for all 3 games because there is just a lot to discuss with these games. Like, believe me, this wasn't even close to everything there is to discuss, but I tried to talk about the important parts as best as I could. This video is already way longer than I thought it'd be though, so let's wrap this up, shall we?
You're standing at a loss.
So, why did I make this video? Well, the answer is very simple, to be real with you. I love this franchise. I love it and appreciate it so much. I want to share it with the people around me and try to get them into it because while I have more than enough friends, and I'm grateful for that, not many of them have played Xenoblade. Some of them are interested, but games like these are hard to get into. And trying to explain how you can get into it, well, this video is like 30 minutes long? That kind of speaks for itself here. Point is, it's very hard to explain, and I figured what better way to explain it than to make a YouTube video on it. It wouldn't just help the people I know who are interested to get into it, but it would also help any other beginners that I don't know personally to get into it as well. This is an incredible franchise made by an insanely talented team of people, and I think the games need more recognition, but that's just my take. With that said, thank you all for watching, I'll see you all next time.
I've seen that look before. The stare